Welcome back to the Diary of a CMO, the podcast where I sit with CMOs and thought leaders in marketing and related media, tech, and creative industries. We'll talk about how they got to where they are, strategies and life lessons we can learn from them to help build a career, business, and ultimately a life that we love. I hope you enjoy, and please subscribe. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining me on this fourth episode of the Diary of a CMO. I'm super excited about this episode because of the guest. I had said earlier on my posts ahead of this dropping this episode that I was talking to a powerhouse. I'm sure she's probably thinking to herself, that's a bit too much pressure. But, I have huge respect for her. And I think, this guest is a reflection of it's a true reflection of the quality of conversations and guests that I want to have on the pod for multiple reasons. First of all, I want to have conversations that I'm interested in having with them. Also, I want to have conversations that I hope that you also find, as the audience and listeners, you find as interesting and meaningful as I do. So I have on the call today a very special guest. She is the advisor and mentor to CMOs and business leaders across the African continent. She's had a career from Standard Bank Group to Kantar, Pernod Ricard, and everything in between. I am so honored and I'm excited. I'm humbled to have on this call with me today, Barene. So, guys, a quick confession. We practiced this pronunciation, so I'm going to give it a go before I allow Barene, do her intro herself. I'm excited to bring on Barene Jankovich-Besan. Oh boy, how did I do, Barene?
Airtime, that's perfect. Perfect enough
Wow,
for this world. Well done, well done.
oh wow, I am so proud of myself. I am so proud of myself. Thank you very much, Barene. I'm so grateful to have you on, and I'm excited about the conversations that we're going to have today, ranging from obviously your own career and your professional journey through to your background with your first degree in psychology. I feel like you have a relentless love for understanding why human beings behave the way they do. Also, your one AI a day exercise. I'm kind of looking forward to that to understand where that came from, and ultimately, kind of giving the audience some sort of an elevator masterclass around brand building and in a way that has a lasting effect on business objectives. So it's going to be a loaded one. We'll try to cram everything into an hour because I know I don't have you for too long. So let's start things off. For those who are meeting you for the first time, Bahrain, how would you introduce yourself? And I like to say that introduction should try to capture your background, where you are today, and what the future looks like for Bahrain. Over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Airtime, and it's a real honor to be here. I'll always remember the first time we met. It was at a brainstorm at the Capital Club. I don't know if you remember. And
Okay.
the group that you were in really has stuck in my mind ever since because the quality of the ideas and the interesting ideas that came out of your group really, stood out. And
Oh,
wasn't
wow, that's
for
beautiful.
the context, it was a room full of people that I'd never met before. So, yeah,
Wow, wow.
you stood out.
Great. I appreciate that.
So
I
it's good to
appreciate
talk
that.
to you again.
I appreciate that.
Okay, in terms of introducing myself, if I had to start with my sort of my origin, I'd probably call out three things that I believe had a significant influence on the person that I am. The first one is my grandmother. So she was a medical doctor at a time when I think few women were privileged to work, never mind, study, have a degree, etc. And she worked for United Nations and worked in countries such as Afghanistan, Malaysia, and interestingly Nigeria. And
Wow,
she
wow,
instilled in me this curiosity about the world and this desire to travel and live and work in different cultures. And this I'm talking about from the age of about 5 or 6. The second factor would probably be my parents, who really epitomize unconditional love.
oh,
They had an incredible ability to always support me, even though I'm quite sure there were many times that they thought I had quite strange and weird ideas. And then the last one it would be my degree, which sort of happened a bit coincidentally, but majoring in maths and psychology, which are two different but I find quite complementary ways of solving problems, which
Mm.
I think I realized later on in life I sort of developed a skill at that point in time um, in terms of how I solve problems. So if I then move to me today, I'm a Yibu living in Lagos. I am adventurous and incredibly curious, always up to try something new, love changes, ambiguity. I love the outdoors, love being active, love running. I also love solving problems and looking at things from different perspectives. So, in a work context, I really enjoy solving a problem, developing an idea to solve a difficult problem or a problem that people have been looking at for a long time and not been able to find a solution. I really love it when that idea actually is hugely simple.
Wow.
Love really simple ideas, and then
Wow.
I enjoy taking that idea, implementing it, and through the implementation, often the idea evolves and grows. And then
Wow.
ultimately, when the idea is implemented, sort of, and even the when the idea is live, let me call it like that, observing what the impact of the idea is. And I always think of the world as a sort of complex system. So you do one thing and you anticipate certain things, but there's always other pieces that happen. And I
Right.
find that whole
Right.
dynamic really
Right.
interesting.
Wow.
And then your last part of your question was going forward.
Yeah.
I probably have two missions in life. The one is to be a contribution, and the other one is to experience as much as possible.
Oh man. Oh no, Barene. I I I'm going to I'm going to say this because this is exactly how I feel. And what are we if we cannot express how we feel, right?
Yeah,
Um that by a long shot is I think the best intro I've had on this podcast.
thank you.
I'm telling you, like it touched every note in that sense. It's and I'm thinking to myself as you were introducing yourself, I was looking at my list of questions, and you know how you ask one question and then you have a segue and a follow up.
Mhm.
I feel like the follow up questions to your intro is going to take the entire is going to take the entire call, and here I am with a list full of questions. Oh man, it's beautiful. um I think it's really remarkable, and I think it highlights the role that the family institution plays. And from my experience growing up in this part of the world, it's not the you don't come across it a lot. It's unfortunate you don't come across it a lot. You do have, people who have had that privilege of growing up within a wholesome family institution, and to kind of hear you and hear the role, the level of influence that your grandma and your parents have on you or had on you, to the kind of person that you are today. It's really remarkable. And if by any chance they are listening to this call or listening to this podcast, I want to say that their little girl turned out to be an amazing human being.
Thank you, Taya.
Yeah. So I think where we can take this conversation to now would be sort of like um maths and psychology, and how did that lead to a career in marketing?
So, as much as maths and psychology was sort of almost slightly coincidental,
Mhm.
I really stumbled into marketing. So
Interesting.
I was looking for a career change and was approached by a friend who was in HR at the Standard Bank Group, who told me about a role and said, "Do you want to apply?" I applied, and I remember struggling to fill my CV because I had very little what I felt like real meaningful work experience. And so I started off in a business support role, which was with a great team, and I'm always grateful for the start that I had. And that role
Wow.
was very broad in the sense that I dealt with consumer complaints, but I also was involved in almost like executing other people's ideas. And
Sure.
so I got quite a good, so I got two things from that. I got broad exposure and I got to work with quite senior people and great people who were willing to, so I learned quite a lot quite quickly. And I can't, it was about a year in or so, there was a big restructure. And coming out of that, I ended up in my first, what I'd call real marketing role, which was in direct marketing. So direct marketing in those days meant you were sending an email, a package, or a letter to consumers, and it was personalized. And there was a bit of direct response marketing. What was
Interesting.
really great about that start, and I realized, one always realizes these things in hindsight, but I realized in hindsight the benefit of that start was there's quite a bit of science to direct marketing in terms of what do you say
Yeah, sure.
when. And so you had to think about a lot of things, and there were a lot of things that really mattered. But at the same time, there were parts of direct marketing where this word versus that word had no implication. So,
Right.
and on the other hand, you could do a lot of A B testing. So you learned quite quickly about how consumers, what messages resonate, what messages don't resonate, how do you
Right.
communicate emotion, etc. So it made me so I started in a space of marketing where you had to think. So yeah, so that's where I started my
Interesting.
career.
Interesting. I mean, like it's always it's just it's interesting how certain fields that you find yourself in sort of overlap with other fields. And I was listening to someone recently, and they were talking about this concept of developing a skill stack where
Mm,
you have a skill in marketing, and then maybe you have a skill, for example, in let's just say for the purpose of this conversation, public speaking.
mm,
And the person's argument was, the further you grow in your career, the 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 task should be, how do you develop complementary skill sets that are not necessarily directly related to marketing, but if you sort of narrow, if you take a deeper look, you will see how those skill sets sort of interplay. And I mean, I'm 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 from a science background, so from engineering to economics, from economics to marketing. And I think that, those two wa- are very useful, especially when you were talking about solving problems, etc., etc. I'm always very keen to get, when I get on this pod, I'm always very keen to get personal perspectives about conversations that are sometimes contentious, not necessarily,
mm,
but sometimes. And one of those conversations is the relationship and the collaboration and the coming together of, agency teams and client teams. In some cases, people leave to tell beautiful stories about those relationships. And in some cases as well, as with every other thing in the world. So there's nothing special here, really.
mm,
In some other cases as well, people leave to tell not too great stories.
mm.
My question to you, Bahrain, is how do you think that, we can foster better working relationship between marketing teams and agency teams, or between marketing teams and core business teams in that sense?
So if I sort of focus on marketing and agency, as you say, it's a very complex space. And to be honest with you, I think it's particularly complex in Nigeria for a
Interesting.
variety of different reasons. For me, I think the starting point is attitude and the perspective one takes on, why, if I look at it from a client, let me start from a client perspective. Maybe that's the way to deal
Right.
it, is look at it from a client
Right.
perspective, and then having worked on an agency side as well, look at it from an
Right.
agency perspective.
Right.
So if I look at it from a client perspective, um, I always say the first thing you need to be clear on is what are you outsourcing for? Are you outsourcing for expertise or capacity? So do you want someone to help you think and come up with ideas? Or is it just because you do not have the capacity to execute and you want the person to execute or the team to execute on your behalf? And if you want someone, if you're outsourcing for expertise, you need to think very carefully about how you brief people, even how you treat them. Because I remember I once ran a workshop between clients and agencies in multiple countries, and we did a reverse sort of reverse role play. And so the client was the agency, and the agency was the client. And one of the creatives spoke up at one point in time and said the fact that how the client treats him influences how his mindset when he starts working on that brief. And there's some clients he loves working with, and there's other clients where it just is a strain. And it was so interesting because the person on the client side suddenly had this aha moment to say, oh, part of the role of my brief is to motivate and excite that person because that's what gets the best out of someone.
Right.
Um, so that's why I say the core for me is understanding if you're outsourcing for expertise or for delivery. Because if you're outsourcing
Right.
for capacity and you want someone to just deliver, then you need to give very clear instructions. And it's a very different
Right.
brief. It's not to inspire. The brief then is,
Right.
I don't want you to, and we need to, sometimes you do just want someone to do something, is
Right.
design something. It has to look exactly like this. These are the
Right.
guidelines. It comes from a global structure. Go with it.
Right. Right.
Um, so that for me would be the first one, is to be clear in your own head why you've got your agencies, because I don't think
Right.
that's front of mind often from when you're working on the client side.
Right.
The second thing is I think emails and WhatsApp often does a disfavor to client agency relationships
How
because
so?
it's so easy to email something or to WhatsApp something versus have a conversation. And one of the things I firmly believe in as well is if something is urgent or important, then have a conversation. And every time I've ignored my own advice in this space, I've regretted it. Whereby if you just send a brief, you've got the person interpret it from their own perspective. Whereas
Yeah.
if you discuss a brief, it's different.
Right.
Especially again if you're outsourcing for expertise. Because if I, for example, Etai, were to talk to you about something that I want to do, you, even in the conversation we have when I'm telling you what I want to do and what I'm trying to achieve, you will ask questions that will influence my thinking. You will even have
Right.
suggestions. So if
Right.
you've got a really great agency, the brief even potentially could evolve in that conversation, which is
Right.
unlikely to happen in an email.
Absolutely.
And then the third one, I think, goes back to a point I made in the beginning, is as a leader of a team on the client side, which would typically be the marketing team, is to not tolerate disrespectful behavior towards agency partners.
Interesting.
Unfortunately, I think it often happens, and it happens both ways. Let me say, don't tolerate it either way. Is it something
Right.
you have to stop as soon as you can? You have to pull that person aside and have a conversation with them, saying, doesn't matter how frustrated you are, and
Mm.
understand how you engage with them, how it influences what we get out of the relationship long term. And I call that out because I think there are unfortunately so many toxic relationships, and even slightly toxic relationships where the people on the, unfortunately, the team on the agency side just do it because the client said, and
Right.
just it's sort of a vicious circle of frustration
Right.
ultimately.
Right. Right.
And if I then, do you want to say something?
No, no, no. Carry on. Carry on.
If I,
I
okay.
could be quiet throughout this call.
If I then were to flip it and look at it from an agency perspective, interestingly, a lot of it for me is people would say is the basics. The first one I would say is to immerse yourself in the client world,
Mm.
and by that I mean is truly understand the strategy, understand what's happening in the market, but even understand the challenges that they're facing. And when you immerse yourself in someone else's world, you generally develop more empathy as well and
Right.
understand why certain things don't work they work the way
Right.
everyone would want them to work, etc., and what the realities are
Right.
that your client is dealing with. And that's where often where the agency's frustration with the client also comes from is they feel like the client could do more, etc., without thinking through what are the challenges that this person is facing. Then
Right.
the flip side to that is I always look at how can I add value to the individual. So, what can I do beyond delivering my job? What can I do to make things easier and simpler for the individual? And I'm going to use a very simple example is when sending an email to include all relevant information in the email. Don't expect the client to remember a conversation from a day before the email and to go and look for a document that was sent a week before. They can do that. And it's not that people are lazy when that, but it just is you're taking away sort of the friction if
Right.
you make it very easy for someone else. And I suppose it's a what for me a way of managing all stakeholders is how can you remove the friction because everybody prefers working with people that they like and make it easier for them. So it enhances the relationship. And often when you are on the agency side, you typically have to work a bit more in terms of the relationship.
Wow. There's so many quotables. There's so many quotables. So many quotables. I'm I mean I'm actually stuttering now. So I am very when the fact that just kind of looking at the conversation from both perspectives, from a client perspective and the agency perspective as well. I think it definitely even helps to better understand the dynamic and what's going on in this person's head versus the other person's head. And I think one of the key words you talked about was the empathy element on both sides.
Mm.
Because I feel like once that exists, it's easier to, every other thing can follow suit a lot more easily once empathy is at the core of it. Um, Thank you for that sort of masterclass on, collaboration between agency and clients. You're going to say something.
So, there's that principle of trust that the person is doing the best that they can with what they've got and what they know.
Please say
And
that. Please say
90%
that
of
again.
people,
Please, sorry. Please say that again.
someone is doing the best that they can with what they got and what they know.
Great.
Um, and 90% of people are trying their best. And if you work with them from that perspective, I also think you get the best out of
Wow. Oh man. That was a deep
people.
10 minutes. That was a deep 10 minutes. On a lighter note, let's talk about some of your, some of the things you do to relax and let's talk about your running. I know that you do a lot of running. I know you're in a running club or two. Tell us about that. How'd you get into that? And what's going on with that?
um, so I always joke and say I think I came running out of my mom's womb. I've
Wow.
just always been very active. So if you see me in meetings, you'll typically see I've got something in my hands that I can fidget with. So, yeah, I've started running from a very early age. And for me
Interesting.
now, it is a habit. A lot of my friends
Wow.
have heard this before, but I compare it to brushing your teeth. Some days you just don't feel like doing it, but you always feel better once you've done it. Yeah, and so for me, beyond the health and fitness, it's a space and time that I think. Again, a lot of people that I've worked with have had me come in the next morning and say, "This morning while I was running, I was thinking," and then somehow and things that were sort of milling in my mind sort of come together and crystallize while I'm running. Also,
Wow.
my form of meditation. So sometimes my mind's just clear. An amazing place to meet people. First of all, anybody can run. All you need is a pair of shoes. It's not like many other sports where you need equipment and all kinds of technique and stuff. And if you think about it, if you run with someone 3 times a week for 1 hour, how many people in your life do you spend 3 hours uninterrupted with in a week? So
Wow.
friendships form quite quickly, and because you see people regularly, you also people talk about everyday stuff. So you get to know people in a different way, and you really meet great people. The road
Interesting.
warriors in Lagos are some of my favorites.
Interesting. And just in terms of knowing people, let's kind of delve into this. Uh, Let me call it a. I don't know what to call it, but I know that I know that you find very interesting when we get into conversations about understanding the customer, understanding the consumer, and so on. How are you thinking about that today in terms of you know, understanding the consumer research, like what are some of the nuance that exist today, but maybe didn't exist maybe 10 years ago or whatever. But just generally speaking, this love for understanding the consumer and understanding human beings. What is that like for you?
I'm trying to think about your question. What exists today versus what wasn't there before? I suppose there's a lot more beyond a lot more techniques in terms of collecting information. You've
Right.
got people are living online as well. So yeah, I even sometimes on certain Twitter posts, I'll go and look at the comments because I'm curious as to how people respond and how they view it as well. But overall, for me, the fascination with research and insights, I suppose, comes from on the one hand the I love joining dots. So in terms of actually doing research, I love joining dots to create a story,
Okay.
and rearranging those dots to see what the story could look like. And
Interesting.
I suppose in some ways comes from it's one of the skills I realized I learned from studying psychology, because in psychology you're looking for patterns in behavior,
Yeah.
but those patterns are often different patterns come are described as different theories from different perspectives. So depending on how you look
Right.
at the behavior, you'll see something different, and you'll see different levers, and you'll see different consequences.
Got it.
So taking that into the real world in terms of looking at research and data from different perspectives. What I also thoroughly enjoy, ironically, is the whole insight space in markets that have a lot less data. Because I started off where I was working in a space where there was a lot of data, you could rely a lot on data. But over time, more and more forced to work without data. And then realized that there's almost where research used to be very scientific for me. I see it much more as art and science now, whereby
Right.
data doesn't tell the full story. You need to use understanding of consumer behavior. You can tap into different people's lived experiences. And it doesn't have to be an exact science. You need to have it needs to answer a certain question. And quite
Mm.
often, it needs to provide enough insight to push a business or an individual or something into a direction. And as they move into that direction, you will discover new insights. So, from it being a very scientific, finite methodology for me, I've definitely shifted into a lot more being more creative in how do you answer a business question
Right.
using actual data. And when I say that, I love real data, and I
Sure.
love numbers and that kind of thing. But there's a
Sure.
lot more that you can use to create a
Mm.
scenario that is adequate for to move a business forward.
Right.
Because sometimes you
Right.
don't answer something in one shot. It's sort of
Right.
a process.
Right.
So I don't know if that answers your
I
question.
think. I think. Oh yeah. Yes, you did. And I think it's just and as you were rounding up your point of view, you kind of touched on it again. It's the statement you made. Data doesn't tell the complete story. And I think in a world where, I think everywhere you look, you'll find that quote, data is the new oil. Or, this, I don't want to say excessive, but this very relentless focus on data, and I think that this the comment you just made, highlights some, how do I put this, some sentiments that I guess as we focus relentlessly on data, we also kind of have to bear in mind some other nuance. Can just talk about that statement again in terms of data not telling the complete story? How would you just kind of touch on that again,
I'll answer it, but I'm going to go in a different direction as well. So,
please?
first of all, when I say it doesn't tell the complete story, is there is always to me it always feels like you need to add lived experience. You need to add the context, because data without context that has no meaning. So you have to add all those sort of qualitative measures to data for it to make sense. And as part of that process, you have to join different data points. And you can, so if you have to take observations that you, for example, if you've got a sales team, observations from the sales team with certain data points from research that you're doing, as well as stuff that you find online. And you need to consider how all of those pieces come together and tell a story, and understanding that consumer behavior is not, there's not one way in which consumers behave. There's always a range of different
Yeah.
behaviors. Then there's
Yeah.
just certain that are more prominent than others. So that's what I mean by data as in actual
Right.
numbers, not telling the full
Right.
story.
Right. Right.
Um,
Got it.
the other side of it is, I actually think that, I don't know if data could be one of two things. Sometimes it's a blindfold, and sometimes it's like a comfort blanket. And when I say a blindfold, is just because people just, sometimes it seems like there's this excessive need, building on what you said earlier, just to have data. And just because I've got data, I'm happy. And that's what I refer to as, sort of why I say it's a
Comfort
blindfold,
blanket.
because I've got the data, I think it's great. And because someone has been able to give me big numbers, I think it's great. And unfortunately, I think digital marketing, people who've worked with me would have heard me say, I think digital marketing is a bit of a black box. But it's because of this excessive need for data, but actually not really using the data to tell a real story, to get to real insights. It's just been, everyone is happy because there's some form of data. And that's why it's sort of a comfort blanket and a blindfold, because once
Yeah.
there's data, we don't ask further
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah. Oh wow. Oh man. Oh boy. So let me quickly say this. You just made a comment regarding digital marketers. Just before we move forward, I just want to
Digital
let you know,
marketing.
digital marketing, yeah. Digital marketing has been a bit of a black box. Um
Mm,
Baron, you have some explaining to do. I'm all ears.
okay. So when I say it's a black box, it means it's an opportunity. So the truth is, there few clients fully understand digital marketing, and it's through
Got
no
it.
fault of the client. It's a very technical space that keeps changing. And on the other hand, when agencies present the data, there are few agencies that, or people that sort of, agencies, people working with digital marketing and the
Sure.
paid media data,
Sure.
who present it in a way that truly tells a story and truly gives the insight.
Right.
And so for me, but the client never asks for it. And because the agencies, and I'm not blaming agencies, because agencies are under pressure and there's a gazillion
Right.
things to do,
Right.
if the client's just happy with numbers, you're probably smart just to give them the numbers.
Right.
Um, but there's a lot more that one could do with the data. And linked
Absolutely.
to that, what the black box is also, everybody feels, especially in sort of, it even keeps senior people happy, is if they see their brand out there on digital marketing platforms. So everyone is doing digital marketing, which creates more and more clutter, which makes it harder and harder to break through. And
Sure.
there's this preference for digital marketing, and certain forms of digital marketing without it really adding value. And so when I say
Yeah.
it's a black box, I think it's a significant opportunity for
Right.
anybody on the explaining side who
Right.
can explain it to a client in a way that makes your client smarter and allows you to
Right.
do smarter work.
Right.
Um,
Right. Okay. Thank you for the
you're welcome to challenge me.
thank you for clarifying. I mean, I guess I'm more, I think my expectation would be that today, as a community or as a collective, whether in digital marketing or the broader marketing communication space, that today we by now we should be doing a better job of telling insightful stories with the data that we are sharing or presenting, whether to clients or to an audience, whatever the case may be. But then again, I like that you said to think of it as an opportunity rather than something else. Rather than something else, it's an
Mm,
opportunity for the right folks to really sort of differentiate themselves in how they,
Mm.
share data, present data, use data to drive real business decisions ultimately. So I'm completely on board with your point of view. Absolutely, I am. Speaking about
And I'm
data,
not
and I
so
go
so
on.
just quickly, and I'm not the clients. People on the client side also have a contribution into this black box. To be
Right,
very clear on
right,
that as well. So as I
right,
said,
right.
if they don't outsource for expertise and don't expect
Mm,
expertise, or even if they think they're
right,
outsourcing for expertise, but they treat it
right.
as just give me the numbers, then would be the
Absolutely,
smart thing to do is just
absolutely.
give the numbers.
Completely agree. I completely
Yeah.
agree. Speaking about data, I mean, I don't
Mm.
think that today the conversation about data can be had without talking about AI. And this is a very good segue into Bahrain's AI, one AI a day exercise. I want you to talk about that, how you came to that. But also, a part B to my question would also be, as you look at the landscape today, and all of the opportunities that AI presents, opportunities and, as some would say, threats as well. What is your perspective on how we can better harness this new technology called AI? Starting from your one AI a day exercise.
Okay, so maybe I should clarify. The one AI a day is a goal. At one AI a week probably, or maybe twice a week.
Okay.
So it stems from it's actually a sort of a promise I made myself or a goal I set myself years ago is whenever new tech is introduced, is to make an effort to lean into it. And because when I'm 100 years old, I still want to be able to lean into new technology. So I really want to make that sort of it's a life motto or life mission for me. And the way you lean into something is to use it. So
Absolutely.
I do random stuff. I use different tools. So I've randomly designed logos. I play around with the background on Google Meet and design different backgrounds.
Right.
Um, I even, as you know, I when you asked me for a profile picture and you wanted
Mm.
sort of half body, not just headshot, I was thinking,
Right.
flip. So maybe a step back. I also always think to myself, whenever I'm thinking I need to do something, I always think, can I use AI? So here I had a challenge. I had only a headshot. I needed a more corporate sort of half body profile of myself.
Right.
So obviously I could have gone and taken a photograph. So I thought, let me try AI. So I tried a couple. It was very interesting. Yeah, and eventually found something that I thought was okay-ish.
And it
Um,
worked. It worked. It worked perfectly,
it
by
was,
the way.
yeah, thanks. The other thing that I also do is so that's the one thing is trying different tools, and then the other hand, I try and improve my prompting skills because that's the one thing that I've identified as something that is important. I've done a few sort of courses, watched a few YouTube videos on prompting, and then I always try and experiment with different prompting. And it's been quite interesting because in the process, I've also realized what AI is fairly good at and what AI has less information, clearly doesn't understand as well, and then realize probably has a lot less information. So therefore, that's why the information they give is quite high level. Um,
Right.
but that has been one of the biggest shifts for me is learning how to prompt. If I can recommend that to anybody, is make an effort to do courses on how to prompt and just keep practicing it. Then to your second part of the question, in terms of the future of AI, I'm
Mm.
going to quote Malcolm Gladwell, who quotes his dad. His dad, who apparently is a maths professor and loves dogs, says the only two topics that he feels like he's an expert on is maths and dogs, and he doesn't comment on any others, he observes. So, in terms of the future of AI,
Oh my
I,
goodness.
I find it really interesting. For me, it's one of those, there's arguments for good and bad. I love listening to all the different arguments. The most important thing for me is to lean into it and get to know it and use it. Especially, I thought of there was one person who compared it to a calculator, and apparently, when calculators came out, everybody said it's going to destroy human beings. No one will be able to do mental arithmetic, etc. I think we're fine. I even
Absolutely.
might be
Absolutely.
controversial.
I think
Wonder if we need to learn to spell because if I know vaguely the letters of a word, Google or not Google the typing sort of autocorrect will help me. So I don't need to
Absolutely.
know everything spelling. So
Oh
world
my
changes.
goodness. Absolutely. I think you know, there are I recently took this AI for marketers course by HubSpot. And
Mhm.
I think I'd been in search for again, in terms of the technology behind it, I can't really lose sleep over that. But obviously, I wanted to get a sense of, how does this technology affect my discipline? And I'd searched for, something, a body of work that could really do that. And the AI for Marketers by HubSpot was a pretty decent job. Not just the HubSpot team, but also had a few AI companies like Lately.ai and some other folks joined the course as well. So it's pretty nothing too complex, but
Yeah.
enough information to give anyone within the marketing communication space a very clear idea of the opportunities for application of AI within the business that we do. So I always would recommend that. And to anybody who's listening, if you haven't checked out that course, you absolutely should. And HubSpot is not sponsoring this episode. Maybe they should, but they are not. But
Yeah.
I took the course recently, and I'm very comfortable with recommending it to anyone else. Speaking of marketing, I know that I mean the way we met was at your time at Pernod Ricard,
Mhm.
and you had the unique privilege to be heading marketing in 2020 for Pernod Ricard. Uh, we're not going to say the Rona word on the pod, but what the peculiarities of 2020 and everything that followed the events that year. It was interesting to see how brands would navigate all of that. You were in charge of marketing at the time at Pernod Ricard, and I'm aware that you did a few things, but what was that like? Leading marketing at such an unprecedented period of time. Bearing in mind everything that was going on, while you still wanted to deliver on your business objectives as well. So how did you navigate that? And what I can say, what are the lessons from that experience?
Okay, so yeah, to thanks for the question, but to add to that, I actually started at Pernod in January of that year. So
Wow.
I was brand
Wow.
new, getting to
Wow.
know everything.
Wow.
And interestingly enough, for me, the biggest lesson, so probably the two big lessons. The one big lesson from that year was how, in terms of managing people, how we unconsciously became reliant on seeing them in the office. So you assume someone. It was very uncomfortable managing a team when you couldn't see them. And when I questioned myself, the biggest discomfort was: are they going to do their work? Will they be delivering? And I kept questioning myself, because why was I not concerned when I saw them in the office? Why was I now suddenly concerned because I couldn't see them? Yes, admittedly, one had to acknowledge that there was a whole lot of distractions now, but there were distractions in the office as well. So a big learning curve for me is I and I still am always think about: how do you manage someone remotely? Because I think if you can effectively manage someone remotely, you'd be a much better person in terms of managing someone in a hybrid context or in a full office presence context. So that would
Interesting.
be the one. Um, the other one for me was just looking at sort of how sort of early trends on consumer behavior just took these big jumps.
Right.
And then being realistic as well, that those jumps, part of that was just that you had a broader spread in terms of how people were behaving.
Right.
And being sort of in that period of time, I kept reminding myself around that. In terms of actually managing the marketing portfolio, obviously there was everything now went online. And I remember we experimented with different things.
Right.
And we were forced to experiment with something like Instagram Live that we had never done before. We were we experimented with, and then you sort of quickly learn because people join and then they drop off very quickly, and things you think are going to be highly successful aren't successful. So I think it was a period of time that forced you to try new things that you in other times would not have necessarily tried. Because for me, what it made very clear is that there's something about the safest route being what you've done before and small incremental change. And I think it's Coca Cola, one of the big brands, who always allocate 10% of their budget to really innovative things. And in
Right.
COVID, we were forced to do more things in an innovative way. The other thing is, I think it gave smaller brands, smaller and upcoming brands, a bit of a sort of an opportunity because the bigger brands were probably disabled more than smaller up and coming brands. And as a smaller up and coming brand, you had time to sort of, I was going to say, get your ducks in a row, get a, develop a strategy, knowing that things would return to normal eventually. Although it felt like it would never happen.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, that definitely was a very interesting period of time, and I think that till today, you still find organizations speaking about coping sort of fully remote or hybrid format. You still find some organizations have kept that practice. Some
Mhm.
still, listen. I have to, especially those in the creative industry where they feel like there's some kind of energy that comes with creativity when you are in a room full of other creatives. People have all sorts of perspectives about it. I guess
Mm.
my take is the outcome.
Yeah.
Did the outcome of whatever arrangement, whether it was fully remote or fully physical or hybrid, at every time you had whatever arrangement, how much of an impact did that have on the outcome, on that business outcome?
Mm.
Bearing in mind, of course, how people deal with the different formats on a personal level, because at the business level it might not have a significant impact, but for someone who maybe lives alone or something, it might be a lot more difficult for them to manage that remote arrangement. So I guess it's kind of look at it on both sides, on the business side and a personal level. And going back to your first comment, I think it comes down to empathy on both sides. How what's best for the people, what's best for the business, kind of thinking.
So if I can just
Go
quickly
on.
build on what you said,
Go on.
is the other thing that I also realized is that there's a difference between, so what was asynchronous in terms of location, so people being in different locations,
Right.
evolved into asynchronous in terms of time. Because if you sit in the same room, you end up doing this something together and you solve it there and then.
Yeah.
Whereas asynchronous location became asynchronous in terms of time, which
Right.
has made some tasks a lot more complex.
Right.
And I think that people have evolved again, but then some things actually should be on a call rather than, in a
Right.
chat or whatever it is. So there's
Right.
multiple layers to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow, I can't believe that we have spent this much time, and I still have a couple questions, but I will be a respecter of time, and
That's fine.
I think the next thing I wanted to look at is, I think this is the favorite part for me. Maybe not. I'm not sure,
Mm.
but this is where I would give you the floor to give our audience some sort of an elevator masterclass, as I like to call it. And I think that you are perfectly suited to be able to talk on the conversation of building brands that last and deliver on real business objectives. Over to you, Barry.
Thanks, Taya. I must admit, I feel very honored to speak on a topic like that because I'm not sure I would have raised my hand in that space. It's something I love doing, but yes. So, how I approach it is, for me, the first thing is I believe that every business the objective of every business in some shape or form is to influence what people do. And when I say people, your consumers, whether it's users, an audience, whatever it is, it could be stakeholders, and actually your staff, your all of those. It's the core of every business. Is you ultimately are trying to influence what we do, but let's focus on the consumer. Um,
Right.
so, if you're trying to influence what the consumer does, you have to look at the consumer, the business challenge from a consumer perspective. So if I'm trying to increase sales, what does it look like from a consumer perspective? What do I want people to do? Who are those people? And you have to keep drilling down. So saying I want, let's say I'm selling bottled water. Saying I want people to buy bottled water is not what you want them to do. You have to keep delving so that you can understand. Because you have to look at what are the levers, what are they currently doing, and what are the levers you have to influence their behavior. A model that I love is think, feel, and do. To think through what you want people to think, feel, and then ultimately do. And the feel is often quite hard, but very important. Feel that your brand is superior is not a feeling. So often we use thoughts to express feelings. But yeah, so to look at the business challenge from a consumer perspective, to unpack it fully from a consumer perspective. And then once you've sort of and sort of part of that is also understanding that if you look at it from a human behavior perspective, there are three key drivers of most behaviors. The one is habit. People do what they've always done. You don't have time to think everything through. The second one is social norm or fitting in or whatever. We buy brands because everybody else has bought that brand and I also want to fit in. And then the third one is to avoid risk. So buying the brand that everybody else buys also is probably the safest option because all of those people can't be wrong. And those factors sort of often have sort of an interplay. It's not necessarily one or the other of those. So ultimately, if you've built that strategy looking at it from a consumer perspective, the next thing for me is to know that the purpose of a strategy is to tell you what you should do, but equally importantly, if not more important, is what you should not be doing.
Right.
So if your strategy is too generic and allows you to do everything, it's not a strategy. It's not
Right.
clear enough. And then the last thing would be in terms of what links to my previous point is when you're executing is to be keep remembering what you should not be doing and to have the guts and the confidence to not do what you should not be doing unless there's an exception, and there always might be an exception why
Sure.
actually you should be
Sure.
doing it. And then all strategies are informed by execution, so keep learning through the execution. But going back to the key point for me would be look at the business challenge from a consumer perspective and how do you solve it from a consumer perspective. And the second point would be very clear on what you should not be doing.
Wow. Wow. Thank you very much, Barene. That was a very that's my preference, right? It's an elevator masterclass. The intention is to keep it that short and sweet. Even if in this case it might have been maybe like a 20, 30 story building from ground floor to the penthouse. But the
Sure.
idea is, but the idea is that, the audience is able to listen and get that sort of nugget in there and something they can go away with. Thank you very much for capturing that. There's a lot to unpack in that for sure. And again, as I've said throughout this call, there's so many quotables, so many quotables. I like that thought regarding thinking of strategy, not necessarily. It's equally as important to think about strategy as what you should be doing, and also what you should not be doing. And I think that's very instructive on so many. I'm going to be doing a lot of unpacking after this call, after this pod for sure. I think that as we start to wind down, because I see that we're about to run out of time. um I have here, what would you say to your younger self? Now, the reason I put this question almost on every pod is is my way of trying to find opportunities for younger professionals or up and coming professionals that senior executive in on the team, or that fresh out of school student, or that just that young or that younger audience that we have out there. This question really is an attempt to kind of point them in a direction they should be looking at. And I just try to frame it this way. What would Barene say to her younger self?
So, if I'm going to answer the second part of your question and the first part of your question slightly separately. So, if I had to say to my younger self, it probably would be, it's okay to think differently. Why not try and make it your superpower? And it's just because I often found myself in situations where I was very conscious of the fact that my thoughts and ideas always felt different. So often I would hold back. Whereas, as I would say to my younger self, is you still need to think about how and when you share something in a discussion. I'm not saying just blurt it out, but be bolder in terms of sharing ideas, even if they might seem sort of slightly different. But if I had to give advice to someone early in their career, it would be to, when you're deciding whether or not to take a job, to consider who you'd be working with. And one of the biggest gifts I've had throughout my career, and especially in my early days at Standard Bank, is I got to work with quite senior people who involved me in a lot of things. So I would often sit in meetings. I remember getting invited to meetings. I think I have no idea why they invited me. But I'd go and I'd sit and I'd listen to how people build arguments. I would sit and listen to the information that they shared. I was in awe of the insights that they had. But I honestly believe that you can fast track your career if you're willing to start at the bottom with a more senior person. So if someone had a choice between a more senior role versus a more junior role, working with someone who you can learn a lot from, I would go for the junior role early on in my career, because later on in your career, people expect you to know, and there's less opportunity to learn from others. That opportunity is in the beginning, and you learn from others that you can't learn in an online course or any academic program. Doesn't matter which Ivy League university you go to. The best learning is on the job from people with experience and
Wow.
different perspectives.
Wow. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's so beautiful. Let me say that I know obviously we talked before this podcast, and I know that one of the points you made was that you wanted to make sure that this conversations and the things that we talked about were meaningful and valuable for people that would be listening to it. Even if I say so myself, I can tell you that it has been extremely valuable. And I'm sure that in the feedback as well, I mean, we'll see it. It's been extremely valuable. It's been very instructive as well in terms of very clear, action points, like we like to say in our world, that people can take away. Very clear nuggets for professional journey that people can take away. So thank you very much, Barene. Thank you so much for your time. I'm happy that your cats didn't walk in. Uh, but extend my love to your pets and to everyone else and on that side. Thank you so much, Barene. I don't know if there's any other thoughts you wanted to share with me, with the audience.
No,
Absolutely,
from
go
my
ahead.
side, just a very big thank you. I'm very humbled by all your compliments. Do appreciate it.
Well,
To be honest with you, I don't necessarily see it myself.
yeah,
Because it's just me
it's
in my
beautiful.
world. But I truly appreciate it and compliment you on the great work that you do. Keep it up.
I
I will
appreciate
keep
that,
watching.
Barene. I appreciate that, Barry. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, guys. Thank you for joining us on episode 4. I'm sure you agree with me. It's been such a joy, such a pleasure, such a breath of fresh air. The conversations we've had so far. I will look forward to bringing you episode 5 of the Diary of a CMO. See you at work. Thank you very much, guys. Bye for now.